Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us in today's webinar on relationship coaching for business partners. My name is Jenny Santi, and I am a psychotherapist and executive coach. And I'm delighted to be your co-host today, together with the incredible Jonathan Fader, whom I shall properly introduce shortly. And over the next hour, we will be exploring a variety of issues relating to relationships between business partners. And I promise you that with Fader present, this will be a lively and educational experience. But before we get started, here's an overview of what we will cover in today's session. First, why do relationship coaching for business partners? What is this all about and who is it for? And secondly, what are the tools and methods that we use in relationship coaching for business partners and how do they work? And third, what are the most common issues that we have seen between business partners and how do we address these issues? And finally, we'll have a few minutes for Q&A towards the end of this session. So without further ado, I'm thrilled to introduce my respected colleague and co-presenter today, Dr. Jonathan Fader. He is a licensed clinical and performance psychologist, best known for working with professional athletes in Major League Baseball, the NFL, the New York Mets, and the New York Giants. And in his book, Life as Sport, Dr. Fader advocates that sports psychology isn't just for athletes, but all of us can learn from skills in enhancing motivation and setting goals, managing stress, and clarifying thought to be at peak performance. Fader's clients include leading entrepreneurs, Fortune 500 executives, celebrities, and many others. And he has extensive experience in working with people in business partnerships. Thank you so much, Fader, for being with us today.
Jenny, it's a total pleasure. And it's a total pleasure to be doing this with you because, just to introduce you to folks here who don't know you, Jenny's got a really very, very interesting background being an executive coach and a therapist, but also having a real deep background in business. So, Jenny has an MBA, and actually, while she's clinically trained, before being a psychotherapist and an executive coach, was a senior executive at UBS and has a deep business background. So she brings such an interesting kind of perspective to this work. She's written a really interesting book too, The Giving Way to Happiness, which I suggest you all check out. And her background has just been among many different parts of business, advising high net worth individuals on philanthropy and working with public figures. So it's exciting to do this discussion and to talk about both of our perspectives on coaching business partners, which I think is a part that's left off of executive coaching and coaching people in general.
Thank you so much, Fader. Appreciate that. So shall we dive in?
Let's do it.
All right. So when we talk about relationship coaching for business partners, what is this really, and who is it for?
I think, when I think about business coaching, I think, first of all, I coach a lot of people, as you do, who are executives and leaders. And sometimes I feel like I share things in common with them and sometimes not so much. But one of the things I feel that I share in common with them is that I am a business owner and I am an entrepreneur and I have partners. And, what I would say is that in reality, while the focus of our talk is on a partnership that you have with someone in owning a business or running a business, essentially, if you're in business in any way, we all have partners. And so when I think about coaching for business partners, it's about how do you make relationships work. We all focus on transactional relationships. We're all focused on what people should do and what we want people to do for our company, for us, for themselves. But we rarely focus on the strength of relationships. And, a business relationship or a partnership in a business functions and has a lot of the same properties as other relationships in your life. It has issues and strengths of trust, of communication, of understanding, and many of the same things that work to improve those relationships. Your friendships, your romantic relationships, your family relationships are things that with some tweaks and some things that we're going to talk about have the same ability to improve those relationships and transform them. And that those things yield really big results transactionally and business wise.
Yeah, it is true that a business partnership is just like any relationship. And let me take it a step further by saying a business partnership and a marriage have many similarities, which
Absolutely.
I shall enumerate. So first of all, both involve a close and often, hopefully, long-term relationship between individuals. And secondly, having shared goals and a shared vision is absolutely essential. And third, communication is the cornerstone, as you said, it's the cornerstone of any successful relationship, whether in business or marriage or friendship. And an open and honest dialogue is so crucial for resolving conflicts and making day-to-day decisions. And fourth, trust and loyalty are so important. Trust in each other's skill, in each other's judgment, in each other's commitment to the business and in each other. And fifth, there's a division of responsibilities. Just as a married couple would often divide household chores and responsibilities, business partners should have a discussion on defining and dividing their roles. And the other one is financial considerations. Marriages often involve managing joint finances, and in a business partnership, there are shared investments and responsibilities as well. And
Yeah.
and finally, there are legal arrangements. Both types of relationships involve legal arrangements, and hopefully not legal disputes.
No, I mean, all those, I think that's a really comprehensive list. And I think people who are listening to this and watching this, when you're hearing this, you're probably thinking, oh yeah, I mean, that does make sense. Like there are things. And I think in a business relationship, and I think, you know, just going back to the partnership idea, I mean, a business coaching engagement or working on getting some coaching or just working through this on your own, this is for people who are entrepreneurs. This is for people who are any form of collaboration, and it's also for people that are considering getting into some type of business relationship. And I think, you know, just to say one more thing, when I was thinking when you were talking about the similarities, you know, it's the same principle that goes for leadership in general. You know, there's two forms of leadership, you know, that we study: transactional leadership, which is about how do I get a particular goal done, and then there's transformational leadership, which is how do I lead people and how do I connect with people. And the same is true of business relationships. Oftentimes we get stuck on the transaction and we don't learn skills to take care of the person that we're talking to really understand them at a deep level and to figure out what makes them tick and what I need to do for this person, not just this business partner. And we think of that at Sports Strata with everyone we do. It's person first, athlete second, you know, person first, entrepreneur second. You know, if the person is feeling taken care of, safe, balanced, they're gonna function better on the field, on, you know, they're going to function better in a boardroom, in a meeting, in a pitch.
So, Fader, you're one half of a thriving business partnership yourself, and I've seen that in action. It's wonderful. Could you talk a little bit about your partnership with Dr. Mike Dolchin and how it started and what makes it work so well?
So I'm really fortunate to have, you know, really one of my best friends as a business partner. You know, Mike and I started two groups together. One is called Union Square Practice, which is a mental health group where we have about 50 people on our team who are therapists and prescribers who work with people with any mental health issue they're trying to address. And so that's could be through medication management because he's a psychiatrist, and we have a team of really talented people who prescribe, or therapy. And we do couples therapy and kind of anything in the life cycle of mental health. And then we have our group, Sports Strata, which is about working with high performers, helping people go from good to great in areas of performing arts and sport and performance, and first responders even. And of course, a big area, a big vertical for us, which is working with business leaders and people in business. And, you know, I feel really lucky to have met Mike. I mean, I actually met him when we were working in a hospital setting, and he was one of the people who was a supervisor on the unit I was working on in a much more mental health focused psychiatric hospital. And I just thought, you know, this guy's super practical and really transformational leader, really cares about people, really develops strong relationships. And so at the end of being on that unit with him actually as my supervisor, just said, you know, we should be friends. And he said, fine. And then, you know, we just continued to collaborate. And I think that, when I think about what makes that relationship work, it's that we've gotten really good with each other at expressing what we think and how we feel, and really good at listening to what the other person is experiencing. So it's much less about winning an argument or having our way count, and more about making sure we understand the other person's perspective. And we'll talk about that, I'm sure, in terms of techniques that business owners and partners can work on. But I think that's really at the core of it. And I think the other core element that makes it really work well is that we understand each other's values, and we figure out where there are shared values beyond anything related to business success or financial success. Really understanding like why. Sometimes with the people I coach, I think about 3 levels of goals. There's the what that we want to accomplish, right? Which is like, we want to make this much money, we want to have this much market share, we want to do X, Y, and Z, we want to grow to this size. But then there's the more important components of goal setting, which are what I call the why and the how. The why is our values, and the how is what specifically we have control of that we're going to do, and really elaborating and being clear on that and developing skills around that. And so Mike and I work a lot on the why. What is it that we want to do? And with Unit Square Practice and Sports Strata, that's helped a lot for us to resolve whatever conflict we might have or disagreement we might have about small things in running a business.
So can you talk about some of the tools and frameworks that you use as a psychologist that are directly applicable to the situations that business partners find themselves in?
I mean, how much time do we have? I can talk about that. It seems like we only have a little bit less than an hour. I love talking about this because I feel very passionate about this. And I feel very passionate that coaching should come with tools. Whether you're talking about executive coaching, just coaching a leader or a team, or you're talking about a high performer or an athlete, I think people need tools. So this goes to the how of coaching. So if the what is helping partners communicate, there needs to be a how. There needs to be a clear set of guidelines for people. And the one that Jenny, that I use and that we use with folks is really based on a model, as you were talking about and really outlined, that it's based on a model of couples work, dyadic work with couples. And one of the models that we use is this model called Imago. And Imago is a fascinating form of couples therapy that's about giving people a structure to work through kind of emotional reactions they have to things. I always ask people when I'm talking to people about communicating, is I always ask people, how did you learn to love? Right. So if you ask people, for example, a simpler question like, well, how did you learn to drive? So everybody who's listening to this can just think about that for a second. How did you learn to drive? Well, everybody has Jenny, how did you learn to drive?
An instructor, driving school.
So you went to driving school, right? And so what was it, one of those cool cars? My driving school, well, first I learned when I was 13 from my cousin with this like 1963 Volkswagen that basically had no clutch. So that was a challenge. But then I learned at the driving school, and mine had like 2 sets of wheels. So there was like a wheel on one side of the wheel. Did you have that, or did you have someone just like driving and you were next to them?
I just used my mom's car, which I eventually crashed.
Okay, well, all right, we'll come back to that at a later webinar. For those who are interested, we'll hear Jenny's her whole driving story, because I want to hear the rest of that. But then if you ask people, okay, so people are able to tell you that pretty clearly, and everybody thinking here is like, oh yeah, I know how I learned to drive. But if you ask people, well, how did you learn to love? Well, I don't really know, right? Like most people will say, well, I just kind of, I don't know. But the real answer to that question is no one's taught us. No one's taught us how to love. No one's taught us how to communicate, right? We learn by observation. And if you're in a business partnership, it's a 1000% guarantee that your partner has learned how to communicate in a different way than you. Just going back to Mike Dolchin, Dr. Dolchin and I, we come from very similar backgrounds, actually. Both were raised in New York, both had similar kind of advanced graduate training, but even us, like, we're different in how we communicate. And so people need to know the ground rules. And Imago is a great system that sets up ground rules for communication.
That's great. By the way, I'm seeing a lot more attendees now present, and I do have a lot of questions to ask you, Fader, but I just want to tell people in the room that you can submit your questions through the chat and we will go through them later. We'll make sure we have time for those later. So Fader, I want to ask you about unequal contribution because in my work and in your work, I'm sure this is something that comes up quite a lot, and it's one of the biggest issues confronting business partners. So could you walk us through what you would advise someone who feels that they are contributing more to the business than their partner is?
It's a really great question. That's one that I come up against a lot. I think one of the biggest things that people talk about is fairness in general. Like that's one of the things that comes up in terms of business partnerships. And that comes up in a number of different ways. I would say the top ways are work contributed, the perception of work contributed, and the financial remuneration in some way, or the equity for that work, however equity is distributed based on the partnership. Just going back a step and linking it to the question you asked me before. So my experience has been that people want fairness financially and work, but what they really want more than anything else is to be seen and appreciated as humans and understood. And so if the disparity in work is so big, or disparity in financial is so big that it actually truly is unfair, that's much more of a concrete negotiation, a mediation between partners where something gets delivered or shared, or usually the partnership is going to dissolve if it's truly unfair to a point that it's unacceptable to one of the partners and no one's willing to move. But most of the time in my experience, it's much more of a negotiation about communication and understanding. And so what the Imago system does is it teaches people how to communicate through conflict. It teaches people how to express their concerns in a way that's devoid of the traditional things that break up any kind of relationship, which are hostility, criticism, contempt, and stonewalling, right? Those are the behaviors that people have that actually create tension between people. And so what Imago does is it says, hey, as a speaker, as part of the partnership, this is how you should talk. You should phrase things in a way that expresses simply how you feel, not attacking. And when you're expressing your concern, you use phrasing that helps the other person hear it. So for example, one of the things we teach people a lot is to use the phrase, the story I tell myself is X, rather than you're trying to gain all the power here, or, you're just the kind of person that does this, or, you are trying to do this to me. There's none of that language. You're really training people to communicate in a way that many people don't have experience, and say, actually, the story I tell myself is that I'm being taken advantage of. You're not saying you're taking advantage of me. And that shift in the way that you communicate makes people less defensive. And then also what Imago teaches is how to listen. So there are various steps, which are a little bit too in-depth to get through, but just to say what they are, the listener has certain roles that need to be coached. One is to summarize what's being said. Two is to validate being what's said, to say things like, well, it makes sense to me that, even if you disagree with the basic principle, you're still finding something in what your partner is saying that makes sense. And then to empathize, to be able to say, I imagine you feel X. And what I found, and I know you too, what we find with partners is when you're communicating in this fashion, you're reducing some of the distrust that can then lead to actually people being more flexible on things like even financial terms. If there's a concrete issue about those things, it's much more of a mediation and a negotiation. But a lot of times this is about trust, and this is about being on the same page with who you are as people. And then the other stuff tends to kind of work out, and people are willing to be more flexible in terms of the negotiation, which also happens in business coaching.
Absolutely. And as you were talking, I'm reminded of one of the most basic things I learned in my clinical training, which is, how they say that most people, when they listen, they're trying to formulate a response, right? But what's important is to just listen, just purely listen, not try and come up with a response in the back of your head as a person is still talking, but really just fully absorb what the person is saying.
I love that so much. And I think the word they use that I hang on to is really absorb. It's even in this webinar, right? Like we have things we want to say, but like even just listening to each other and hearing that. And I think what you did really beautifully there is show the overlap between kind of counseling and coaching, right? There's a lot to be learned. I mean, and I say a similar thing to what you're saying. I mean, I just think of it with business partners is there are two ways to listen. One is to reply, and the other is to understand. So what we're doing in this work is coaching people how to listen to understand more versus listening to reply. And by doing that, you're freeing up a lot of stuck behaviors for people so that they can negotiate if negotiation is possible.
That's wonderful. So one of the questions I got here is, what would you advise someone who is still in the process of assessing for fit with a potential business partner? What questions should they ask of each other?
I think that the biggest mistake that people make. So I'll say that what I work with clients is actually to create filter. So this question is so. Whoever asked this question, I really applaud it, because I think a lot of people are only thinking about what can this business partnership bring to me, normally on a level of like measured financially or measured by business growth. I have a strong belief that satisfaction and life satisfaction and enjoyment are critical, and I think actually are only add to business success. And so what I've done with many people is to create filters for themselves for how to assess not only business partners but investors, because oftentimes people want to come invest in something that you're growing. You're like, I'll take it. And I think, my experience has been one of the biggest stresses that people have in growing businesses is taking on investment or investors in which they're not aligned with the person who's investing. And that alignment could be philosophically, or it could just be characterologically, like what kind of person is investing in my company and what does that mean for me day to day? You're inviting someone into your home, right? And what's that going to be like to live with that person? And so I suggest people create filters. And that
Can you give an example of such a filter?
Yeah, totally. One of the filters is I must go to dinner with this person and someone I trust, and then get that person's who I trust feedback about the person. Like I have to have them in a social situation and get an objective view for that person. I've had people say, well, the person who's investing, I have to measure their level of anxiety or their level of reaction, right? And so I want to see them in different contexts. The other thing is what people call like the server test. How do they treat someone who's they perceive as having not a financial value in their life, right? The other one that sometimes we think about is like what some people actually value the way that people are, preparation. Are they on time for a meeting? What does that say about them? So, everybody has a different things that they know are predictive generally of people that they're going to value in their life. So I think, having that, another thing that people think about honestly is that I've seen people creating their filters are the personal net worth of the investor, not what they're offering, but where they're at, because is that going to contaminate their view? Will they be more emotional about the particular investment? But, I think thinking about that in terms of a business partner is the same. I suggest to people when they're thinking evaluate a business partner is first evaluate the person and then the business partnership. Is this someone that is going to, color your life in the kind of colors that you want to be colored with? This is going to be, going back to my business partnership, I probably see Mike Delchin more than I see anybody on a day-to-day basis. And so do I want to spend time around this person? Do they make me feel good? Are they going to be overall beneficial for my creativity? And everybody has different threshold for that. But
and do they make you look good, right? I was just in a conversation with someone who's actually in our in the room right now in this webinar, and he said that he is also in a business partnership, and he said that he and his business partners is basically trying to make each other look good in front of clients, in front of the public, and it's a huge part of why their partnership works. They really strive for that.
I think that's a great filter, right? So the filter too, yeah. And does this person see me in my best light? Like, we all know the people, sometimes people say something about me and I'm like, wow, I want to think about myself the way that person thinks. So I think your business partner should really be thinking, they should be one of those people that when if someone said like, tell me about Jenny Santi, like they're going to say something that you feel like, wow, that's a better version of me than I even have of myself.
Great. So sometimes I see these things on LinkedIn where someone posts uh almost like a job opening for looking for a business partner, looking for someone to like co-found this venture with me. So my question is, do you think that's a better way to go about it than partnering with your family member or your life partner, romantic partner, or a friend?
I mean, you know, I take this back to a question I get. It's such a great question. And I take it back to a question I used to get a lot when I worked primarily with high performing athletes. So, you know, as you know, I worked in NFL and MLB, and I still coach a number of athletes and high performers, although a lot of our work is in business. Um, and people would report, you know, journalists and people would ask me, like, is it good to be in a relationship when you're an athlete? Like, is that good or bad? Right. And I was like, I mean, it depends on the athlete, and it depends on their partner. And so I think I have not found a pattern. I know business partners who are romantically involved. And I think that, you know, there are pros and cons to that, right? I think the question is, you know, what is the kind of work that needs to be done? So for example, I coach a lot of people in family businesses. And I think family businesses, my experience is that you have to do more work if you're going to decide to be in a family business, to be able to understand, am I talking to you as my father right now, or am I talking to you as, you know, the COO or a
Yeah,
CFO?
I've actually seen people in such arrangements where they're working with their father, they're working with their mother, and in the business context, they would call their parent by their first name. It's not mom or dad,
Yeah.
it's John or Jill. And
I think I think that's a really good strategy, actually, is to do that. um, and even to have kind of a code word, right? Like to even say, "Hey, I'm talking to you as dad now," right? Like you're not, to just set the brain right, right? And say,
yeah,
because a lot of that confusion of role, you know, as we know in business, one of the biggest things that people work on teams is role clarity and role acceptance. And so there's a lot to your question. You know, if you're going to choose someone who you know, which many people do, I did, right? That you're clear about, you know, and actually Mike and I do this. Like sometimes I'll just say, hey, let's go out for dinner as friends, right? Like, let's just have a dinner, because, you know, you're going to kind of sink into your business partner pattern, right? And actually, by the way, I think that my experience has been that very much mimics romantic relationships, like where
hmm
I coach a lot of people on, you know, my coaching, as you know, and yours too, is about a full life coaching. It isn't about just like, hey, we're going to crush it in business. And so I coach a lot of people to have date night. And if I'm coaching someone to have date night, as part of their balance in their life, one of the rules I suggest is like, hey, you don't talk about to-do list items, no talk about work, right? And you can talk about kids, or other family members, but not in a planning way, only in an experiential way. And that's the work. And so I think it just requires more ground rules. And I think it requires more imago dialogues.
Absolutely. And in the same way, and I've worked with a lot of families, and in the same way that you wouldn't bring up business on date night or family night, we do get intentional about setting up family meetings, like family council meetings, family business meetings, where you might have that in conjunction with a vacation, but there is specific time, time specifically carved out to have that discussion about whether it's a family business, some family issue, something that requires a different mindset.
I think that's really, I mean, again, I mean, one of the things I think about here, and you're pointing to it in what you're saying, is I think, you know, people don't treat their relationships with the same type of vigor and energy that they treat their business projects, right? And I think that's really what a lot of this coaching is about, is saying like, well, what if you treated your, what I say to people all the time is like, what if you treated your family as though it was a job, right? Like, what if you said, this is my business, this is my other business? Like, you would be functioning at a totally different level. And the same is true with just treating your business partnership in that same way. Like, what if you treat your business partnership as though the actual business relationship was the core of your business, like the quality of the relationship? And so, and practically speaking, what that means is certainly learning these dialogues, but it also means like adding value to the person, right? Like, you know, I Mike Dilchin is terrible at ordering lunch for himself, right? So I just make sure sometimes that he gets lunch, right? Like these are simple things that happen that, you know, at the end of the day add up, right? And so, I mean, and the list of like the things that he does, I think it goes on and on in terms of like, you know, he's an unstoppable like handyman. He won't let anyone else, any contractor, come into the practice. Like he does these things. It's kind of amazing. So, you know, like I think, you know, it's like people's research on love languages, right? Like, what is your partner? This is not a romantic love most of the time, although sometimes it is. But, you know, for most people, it's like, how do you demonstrate care and added positive value to the person? That's not a transactional thing. What are they going to appreciate? For some people, it's encouragement. For other people, it's like you just get something done for them that you know it's gonna it's they're gonna appreciate, right? For other people, it's like a gift, like an actual gift, like you put a card on their desk. These sound like small, unrelated things to running a huge business, but you know, we often focus on what's wrong with relationships rather than just finding the thing that's going to add value and building strength in the same way you would with an injury, right? You can, if you're going to PT, they're going to strengthen the opposing muscle groups. And that's what we're doing in these relationships.
I have so many more questions to ask you, by the way, but I do want to remind our live audience to please send in your questions. I will monitor them as I'm speaking here. My next question is, do you think business partners should be very similar to each other or very different?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think that as long as the differences stimulate, right? I think if I think the the differences, I think as long as as long as the core values are the same, I think differences usually stimulate. It's just if the differences are along values, then I think it's really hard to rectify that.
I agree. I think it should be a case of shared values but different skill sets so
That's
that
a
you
really
don't
good way to
duplicate
say
each
it.
other's work.
That's a really
Yeah.
good way to say that. And you know, and I think even just partners asking themselves that, you know, what do you see for yourself? Why is this work important to you? Right. And actually, I think, you know, things like creating a mission statement that people typically do,
Mm,
you know, working on that. So I'll give you a specific example. You know, Mike and I, when we started Unit Square Practice, we talked a lot about what the underlying philosophy should be of
mm,
how we do mental health treatment. And we came to the statement that that our therapy, our work should be practical and active with a sense of humor. And
mm.
and that's really defining, right?
And
And
you took the time to write that down,
yes, we did. Yeah, exactly. And it was
workshop it.
hard. It was hard. We really workshopped it because, you know, we're similar in some ways, but we're different in others. You know, he's a psychiatrist, come from a medical model background. I'm a psychologist, come from a psychology background. There's overlap. We're different ages, right? There's lots of different, you know, there's differences and there's difference in perspective, but that's a commonality in our philosophy that really rang true, and then rings true for people like you and other people who've joined us and become an integral part of the team.
Great. So we do have a lawyer with us in the audience, and I want to talk about the topic of legal agreements. Obviously, there have to be legal agreements in place to protect each member of the partnership. So could you walk the audience through the difference between the role of a lawyer versus our role as coaches and counselors in these business partner coaching sessions that we do?
I mean, I think that, you know, that you know, to be very clear, we're not attorneys. We're not creating contracts. Um, we're really working on thinking about behaviors that could in some way help people live up to contracts, right? So I've certainly read through contracts that an attorney has created and think about like, okay, well, what's getting in the way here of doing that thing? Um, and I think, you know, for me, the center of our work is generally not mediating particular conflict. It's more about creating skill for people to do it on their own. I would bet everybody on this call is a high IQ, probably pretty high EQ person, right? And, it's not about, people understand, like they definitely understand the dynamic. It's that there are things blocking them. I think if there's critical, immovable contractual issues, that's much more for an attorney to sit down with. Oftentimes, it's not. Oftentimes, it's more of an emotional reaction to things that are happening, or at least that communication issue is creating a barrier to someone finding generosity or flexibility that could lead to some form of mediation. So I also have collaborated with many attorneys who have said, like, we're at a stumbling block here. I think this is much more of something that a few meetings would help to get us to where we need to get to come up with an operating agreement or something like that. And so I think, what this is about is much more about the human factors in a negotiation rather than the negotiation itself.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So let's talk about disputes, because unfortunately, the fact of the matter is that people usually come to us when there is already an issue, a dispute, right? Whether it's in their personal life, as in couples counseling, or in business partner counseling. So could you talk a little bit about how you would help a business partnership go through and manage a dispute, manage an ongoing dispute?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are usually two phases to this. So the first thing that I do with people is more of a session where we just evaluate where things are at. It's very similar to a couple session, right? Where I ask people, first of all, like, I ask about values. So I say, like, tell me how you two know each other, right? How did you meet? And I ask them, why did you start this business? Like, what's in it for you? And what I'm measuring there and assessing is the baseline level of trust and likability and connection, and also how much their choice to do this business is value-based. So for example, if I'm working with a business partnership and they come in, I ask those questions and they can't find any joy in talking about each other at all, I don't see it underneath, it's usually a sign to me that we're not great shape. So I'll take that in mind and we'll see where we get. But usually a business partnership that's viable, people are able to kind of put their immediate conflict down for a second and tell me a story about how they met and some positive aspect of their relationship. And then I'm assessing for their common value, right? If I don't hear anything, if I hear no alignment between them, I many times will say, I'm not really sure this is the right fit for you. And then the other thing that we really do is we engage in a commitment. I find that like any kind of thing in involving mental skills, it takes time. It's not something people often. It's what I say to people about mental skills coaching. People come to you and say, "Oh, like, I tried what we talked about. I tried the Imago dialogue this week. It didn't work. We're still in conflict." I'm like, well, when you go to the gym and you do 10 squats, you don't look at your thighs and say, like, why haven't you grown? This is something that takes a time to adjust. And so usually what I'm doing at first is I hear what their pain points are and show people I understand. And then I'm really working on teaching the communication style that works. I teach people this dialogue. It takes a session or two, and they learn how to communicate in a radically different way that diminishes conflict, diminishes defensiveness. Once they're able to do that, then we start to communicating about the pain points through the dialogue, right? And what I find is it gets us to a point where it's kind of like, loosening up a knot, right? So then you can disentangle it, right? You get some space in there and then you're able to move, right? And so, so then you can actually think about, oh, what is the negotiation needs to happen here? What do you need to see from this person? And the way I usually do that is, well, what do you want to see from the other person? And then what does the other person want to see from you? And then we focus on a kind of an economy where people are adding to that, but they're much more in a place to do that when you understand the person's perspective.
Absolutely. I have an interesting question here from the audience, and it's on the topic of what if the problem isn't your business partner, but you two are facing an issue together, such as the economy? I mean, there is someone in our audience who's from the media, Hollywood business, and as we all know, there's been a lot of strikes, deals and relationships are on hold, and it's just a really tough time to do business. So, how could business partners be there for each other through these really tough times?
I think that one of the things when business partners bring this to me is the first thing to do is to reconceptualize what it means to be going through a hard time. So I'll use the pandemic, like I think my experience has been personally, and I had a lot of personal loss during the pandemic, people, you know, just many things, and I'm not alone in that. But what I also noticed in the pandemic was it was a tremendous force to deepen relationships and deepen connections to things that are important to us. And so I think one of the things that business partners can do is to say, this is an opportunity for us to get stronger together and to kind of work that mentality. So to borrow from Carol Dweck and growth mindset, when there's a stress or something that's difficult, we have a choice. We can choose to develop a mentality that this is a challenge, or we can develop a mentality that this is a threat. So in my own business partnership, I've seen this many times. Our business went through the pandemic. It was transformative. Many people relocated. Lots of our coaches and therapists moved around. There was so many issues people did with physical space and all that, moving everything to Zoom. I mean, there's so many different aspects of that. And people are still struggling with some aspects of that. I think, though, the outward idea to say, and even verbalize to your partner, like, I'm so lucky to have this challenge with you. And here are the ways that this is going to bond us together. Having that mentality is really powerful. Like, we can look at this as something that's a threat and say, this is going to hurt us, hurt our business. Or we can say, look, this is a stressful time, but it's why we have a partnership, right? To be able to lean on each other and to be able to work at this together. And the only other thing I'll say about that is, like, look, the core of our philosophy, one of the core principles of our philosophy at Sport Strata in the way we do executive coaching is one that we borrow from sports and performance psychology, which is where we really help people is to help identify with people what aspects of performance they control. So the simplest example is like P&L for a trader. Like, lots of people sit there with their screen up looking at stocks moving all day, but in reality, we don't control that, right? And so helping people realize that what you control really is your attitude, your preparation for things, and your effort. And so working with business partners to really work on being very specific about how they're going to work together on developing a great attitude, how they're going to work together on preparation, like what's mine, what's yours, and how you're going to encourage each other's efforts are things that every business partnership could work on better and work on with coaches.
Absolutely. So we have another question from the audience, which is, how do you prepare for starting a family and running a business? I think, if I'm not mistaken, this is alluding to the fact that we have responsibilities other than the business, and sometimes we are accused of maybe not being focused enough because maybe someone just gave birth, or someone has family responsibilities, and so on and so forth.
That's such a wonderful question. And look, I mean, the book I wrote, Life is Sport, is all about these kind of things. It's to say, what I think about is like the whole, your whole life is your business, right? So we kind of think about like, oh, like, okay, I have my business and then I have my life, but really, for almost every business owner, the quality of your family life and your romantic life and your friendships is going to either, create barriers for or supercharge your business. If I'm as an entrepreneur, if I feel great in my relationships, great in my physical health, that everything's in line, I'm just like in this webinar, right? Like, I don't know how you slept last night, but I slept pretty good. And that's going to dictate the degree of fader that shows up in this particular thing. What my life is like outside. And so this goes back to what I was saying before, you know, people I think don't realize that, and they don't spend enough time really thinking about, like, if you look at your schedule, everybody's schedule for the week, right? It's like most people's schedules from whatever 8 to 7 or something like that are packed, right? But then in the evening, there's nothing scheduled, right? It's just like, oh, I'm done. And then like we go home and we're like, should I watch TV? Should I go for? But I really think about working with people on curating the rest of their life, right? So what should your what kind of things, maybe you're not going to call them meetings, but do you have a date night with your partner? Do you have time with your kids? I work with, many of the people I coach, many of the men and women I coach in partnerships and not have, 1, 2, 3. I mean, I have someone who has 5 kids. And so, sometimes the goal is just simply like to have a touch with every kid every day. And if you're not partnered, if you don't have kids, it's like, what is the quality of your friendships, and who are you choosing to spend time with, and how are you doing that? And so I think with business partners, it comes down to 2 things around this. One is, are you making sure that you are creating an active strategy for the rest of your relationships? And also, do you have an active strategy for your business partnership in your transformational thing? A good step is having coaching, but what are you doing week on week to create strength in that relationship? Are you spending some transformational time with your business partner on a regular basis, right? Do you take a trip once a year with that person? Do you do something in the arts with that person? How do you create, do you have other things that you can talk about with that person to create more scaffolding for when there is conflict, or you got to know that the person has your back. And this is one of the ways that develops that sensation, that sense of psychological safety.
Absolutely. And really being proactive about those times that you spend with your business partner, right? Not just waiting until, okay, we need to talk, like we need to talk moment, like literally having maybe a monthly check-in, a weekly sit down, stand up meeting, whatever it is that you need. We have another question from the audience, which is on the issue of trust between business partners. And he's asking, is there a point in the relationship that one can say that trust between the partners has been established, or is it a continuous process of trust building?
I mean, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that, Jenny. I mean, my thoughts are that, when I think about trust, I think of all the work and research on psychological safety by Edmonton and a number of other, researchers. So this research is really powerful. And when we go give talks to corporations, we talk about this, as you know, and it's something that we talk through with coaching, right? Which is psychological safety is a concept which basically means I feel in a relationship or a group that I can really be myself, and I can say my ideas without criticism of who I am, right? So one way to think about it is the most unpsychologically safe place for people was probably 8th grade. Like that's where you felt the ultimate sense of like, people are going to tease me or whatever it is. So in my mind, a big part of this is developing psychological safety with your business partner. And what goes into that, usually speaking, it's very clear that it's sharing who you are, what you feel, and how you think about things. You could think about this like, even if you're talking about a charged political topic that we don't want to talk about. Well, can I talk about that to my business partner, right? And feel that they're going to hear me, even if they disagree, they're going to listen to me with empathy and kindness, right? And so, just thinking about that, I would say that to me, trust is something that develops ongoing and there's no end to it, and that there are things always that create more or push us against. One of the things I didn't say about imago is it's based on this attachment theory, which is a huge body of research in psychology about how people trust and feel safe in relationships. And generally speaking, with business partnerships, when there's a rupture, it's because for some reason one of the partners doesn't feel safe. They feel unsafe psychologically. They feel under threat. They feel that that they lack trust in something that's happening in the relationship. And while that may manifest or come up in terms of financial discussion, it's usually more based on a feeling, right? Because, oftentimes people aren't in threat, even though they feel they're in threat. And so working through that in terms of developing more trust and psychological safety is so absolutely critical.
Absolutely. I agree with you. And I like to remind myself that it takes time to build and earn trust. And as a therapist and coach, we like to be trustworthy we like to have send the first impression to our clients that we are trustworthy. But the reality is that it takes time to build that by being true to our word, following through with our actions, being sensitive in our communications with them. And it's true also for business partners. There's a question here on how do you know when you should give up or keep going in a business partnership?
That's such a hard one. I mean, I think
It is, and it's a fitting end to as we come to the end of this webinar. What are your thoughts?
I mean, my thinking about that is the one reason I would say more it's about like why not to give up. I mean, I think, to me, the question is am I giving up on something out of fear? So if you're giving up something out of fear, it's generally, in my experience, probably not the right reason to give up, right? So, and then the next question is, to what extent goes back to the kind of we use the acronym or the abbreviation APE, like what we control, our attitude, or A, or P, our preparation, or E, our effort. Do I feel that I've done my best on those three domains, right? Have I had the best attitude about this process? Have I prepared as much as I possibly can? And have I given maximal effort, right? So typically my experience is when people really review those things and think about it, the answer is usually no, right? I haven't. And so I would say we go back to the drawing board and say, like, let's do those three things first before we give up on something. Like if I put in my best attitude towards this and I put in my maximal preparation, maximal effort, and there's no result, then I think it's something that you have to really question the viability of the partnership. And for me, the what we're looking at is the slope of the line, right? It's not like how much better does it get? Is like, is it moving in the right direction or not? And whoever's asking this question, if you're asking yourself this question, the more issue is that's a sign that definitely business coaching is something that will be helpful for you, right? Like that's more what I would think is like, if you're saying to yourself, I'm not sure if I should give up or keep going, the first step would be go and get some coaching because you've invested a lot of your time and money in this. Investing another few hours is well worth it to see if there's an angle here that maybe you're missing.
Mm-hmm. That's wonderful. So we have just about 5 minutes left before we close. So any last minute follow-up questions, please send them across. Otherwise, Fader, I do want to ask you sort of like a trick question, which is we're talking about what business partners can learn from relationship coaching techniques, right? But what about people in relationships, personal relationships? What can they learn from the strengths and character, the qualities of a strong business partnership?
You're saying people just about their own relationships?
Yeah, their own relationships, their romantic relationships, their friendships. What can they learn from business partnerships at work?
I mean, I think that the key element here that I see is about generosity. That we're typically thinking about what we can get. And my experience has been that really strong business partnerships are where people are really generous with each other and are able to say, you know what, like, okay, maybe I'm not getting everything I want, but I'm going to return to this conversation with generosity of spirit and generosity, whether that means some level of financial generosity. I've experienced that in my own business relationships, in my own friendships and romantic relationships, coming at things from a place of intellectual and even material generosity ends up with me being in a better position on all levels later on. And so I think that's one thing I've learned is just like coming at things from a generous perspective. And if there's anyone that probably relates to that, it's Jenny Santi, who kind of wrote a book about some aspects of that. But I think, that's been my own personal learning, is just the more generous I am of myself, it tends to come back to me. And I think that's really difficult, because when we're feeling threatened, we tend to be less generous more than more, which is why this coaching, I think, is absolutely helpful, is it can get people to a place where they feel safe enough to actually be generous. And then that offers a lot of nutritious material to the relationship, whether it's a business relationship or a more or a romantic or a friendship.
Well, on that note, I have to thank you too, Fader, for being such a generous colleague and collaborator and co-host. And we're coming to the very end of our session. So I'd just like to thank the audience. Thank you so much for joining us. We will be sharing the recording of this session for those of you who've asked for it, and also for those who are not able to join us live. And you know where to find us if you're interested in this topic. You can email us at team@sportstrata.com, or just to go to our website, sportstrata.com. Fader, do you have anything to add?
No, this is lovely. And I appreciate your question at the end, because, it's our work in this is definitely a partnership. And I think your thoughtfulness about this, and how you bring a unique experience in what you've written about, but also just, the crossing the line between kind of therapy and coaching. And so I can't wait to hear how people respond to this, and to keep this conversation going with you all, and wish everybody who's listening today a lot of great conversations and a lot of good times enriching your business partnerships.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to have had this opportunity to talk about this topic that's rarely talked about. And it's great to have these conversations, because we really, truly do learn a lot from each other. So thank you again, Fader, and the audience, and I wish you a good afternoon.